Hello, I'm Sarah Samuel. I graduated from Loyola University, then as Sarah Carta in 2009. I will honestly say this is not my first take. It is very strange to interview yourself, but I am really thrilled to be speaking with you all. I got my degree in sociology, which I am so grateful for, and I am excited. I wish it was in person. The time zones don't allow for that. But I will tell you what I've done since 2009. I went right on to get my master's in social work, graduated from that in 2011. I went to the Brown School of Social Work in St. Louis, which I highly recommend. I really enjoyed it. Always knew I wanted to work on more macro issues. And so while I was studying, I made my own major individualization, I guess you would call it. That was exactly sort of what I wanted to do, which was more program management for international programs. And I've mainly done that. I think in my heart, I knew I wanted to work on international issues, but I was a little scared to say that. So perhaps that's my first piece of advice. You're not going to get to where you really want to go until you're ready to say it. So I always thought, well, I'm not smart enough. I'm not traveled enough. I've seen the people who do the Peace Corps and these other awesome programs, and I'm not them. If you don't say it, it can't happen. So that's the first thing I'll say. So let's see. I worked for the U.S. government. I've done 8 years of U.S. government work, all in international programs. I've worked for USAID. I've worked for DFC, which is another government agency that does international development. If you have questions at working for the government, I'm happy to answer them. I think it's a good idea early on in your career because if you are willing to work hard, you can work your way up. And there are lots of opportunities in the government. I've also worked for a lot of NGOs, which is a lot of fun, and I love the people. As a sociologist, I'm sure you will also love the people at NGOs. But sometimes there's not a lot of room for growth. That can be an issue. And then, of course, they're usually pretty small. So it's hard to, if there are personality issues, that sort of gets tricky when you're working on a team of 6. But I also have worked for Save the Children, which is a larger nonprofit, which I highly recommend. I really loved working for them. So yeah, overview of my education. MSW, lots of NGOs, lots of US government work. I moved to the UK a little while ago, and I have been working for the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change since then. I have also lived in Kenya for 5 years, which I can talk more about, but that was an absolutely wonderful opportunity, and there's a lot of opportunities if you go abroad. I highly recommend it, but that'll be my first overview. Hello, Sarah again. All right, MSW, let's talk about it. So I loved the social work class by Jill Christy Tyler when I was there. I love her. I love the work she was doing. I shadowed her and she was a good mentor to me. And so I said, okay, great. I like what she's doing. Let me give it a shot. So I went on to get my master's in social work. When I got to social work school, I learned a few things. One, I do think it's helpful to have a few years of work under your belt before you start a master's, only because you bring a little bit more to the table and you know a little bit more where you want to go. Fortunately, I had done a lot of internships and worked through college and high school. So I did come with some education or some idea of what I wanted to do. I probably could have used another year or two, but for me it worked. But if you don't have several internships under your belt before grad school, I would recommend doing that first. What is social work school? It was a wonderful time, a lot like being in the sociology team, where you're surrounded by like-minded people who are interested in the same things you are, and want to have similar conversations that, let me tell you, they're not having at the business school. They're having other conversations. So if sociology feels like a good place for you, social work school could as well. There's a lot of similarities. Dr. Conradi asked a very good question about, does it open doors? Are there limitations? The more that we learn how expensive education is these days in the U.S., the more we really should think about that. Um, I would say I often don't present myself as having an MSW, which is unfortunate, but there are buzzwords with social work that's really hard to get around. So when I was in social work school, I made my own major, and it was program management. So I often say I have a degree in program management. For what it's worth, it gets a little bit more recognition. What a master's is really good for is getting a pay increase. So if someone's going to pay you $30,000 out of school, they're going to pay you a little bit more if you have a master's. So I have always used that to my advantage when negotiating salaries, which you always should negotiate a salary, never take the first salary. I've said, okay, great, and don't forget I have a master's degree. So I have definitely used it as that leverage. Opening doors. I think the most important thing about any grad school that you could choose to go to is the network that you're going to build. So you want to be surrounded by the people that you want to work with for the rest of your career, that you want to pick up the phone and call when you're looking for your next job, when you want to start your own venture. So wherever you go, you should be working with people who can help you and who you can help further on in their careers. Limitations. I mean, I think I said the buzzword. I think it's not respected as much as it should be. I learned so much about myself during those 2 years. Social work school is really good for that. I learned so much about the world, a lot like sociology. So for me, on a personal level, it was a really great experience. And there's always a way to spin something to fit what you need it to fit, right? So you say, so I say, I learned about how societies interact, and I did this internship. Never underestimate the value of an internship. My goodness, all the internships that I had in grad school and in undergrad were pivotal. I guess I'll say something about internships. That is where you figure out what you want to do in a very different way, right? School is so important, but also go out there and be a school social worker. That's what I did. Go out there and work for the NGO as an intern. It's much easier to get an internship than to get a job. So if you want to learn about how Save the Children is working, or you want to learn about how to run a city, get an internship and learn. And then that's what really helped me push me in different directions, was different internships where I'd go, okay, that wasn't it. So glad I learned in a 6-month internship that job wasn't for me, but let me go try this next thing. All right, this one's for Dr. Conradi, and it's a tough one. Work and family balance. Okay, I've done it now in 3 countries, and I'm not going to lie, it is still really hard to be a professional working mom in the world. It's gotten a lot better. This is how I like to talk about it. My grandparents' generation kind of didn't do it. Maybe you had a job, maybe you didn't, but women generally stayed home. The next generation, my mom's generation, congratulations, they got to work. None of their household responsibilities changed. They still had to take care of the kids and the cooking and the cleaning, and they got to work because that's what they wanted to do. And so I watched my mom go through that, and it looked horrible. And I decided I wanted to do things differently. I don't know if Dr. Conradi remembers this, but on one of my papers, I put on the back what I thought a schedule should look like of 2 partners trying to have children. One goes to work early, one comes home early. How do you find that balance? And so I will say, in terms of figuring out motherhood and having a career, the first thing you have to do is pick a really good partner who's on the same page as you, and who not only encourages you and supports you, but makes sacrifices. This is where it gets really tricky. I think in our generation, or in your generation, the support is there, the encouragement is there. If they want you to have a really thriving career, they will have to make sacrifices, and I think that's the next phase that we're still working on. So pick a partner that understands that. And then, yeah, you're going to have to make a schedule of some kind that works for you. I do go into the office first because I'm a morning person and that works for me. And my husband does school drop off. We have 101 different types of childcare: breakfast club, after school club, a nanny some days, all sorts of things, expensive things to keep our son occupied while we are both working. And then because he starts late, he works late. So I run. Have you been to London through the Victoria Station? I literally run to make the train, the 4:50 train, in time to be home to pick up my son and get dinner going. So it is tricky, and it's doable. But you have to. The other thing you can do is live close to your parents. I haven't tried it yet. I have a lot of friends that do that, and that's a really effective manner. I would keep that in mind. But it's uh, hard, not just in terms of figuring out the timing of things. There is a different level of mom guilt that I'm just not sure if it exists on the other side. I don't know. I've never been a dad. But it's a thing that my friends and I talk about a lot who work. For me, it's worth it for my son to see that I have a job. He knows I have a job. He asks me about it. He's only 4. Um, but then there are also societal things that are still happening, and it's also different by country. So I haven't been a mom in the U.S. I have been in Kenya. It was much easier. It's pretty hard in the UK. But I think there's a lot of good dialogue happening now about women in the workforce. I think COVID did some wonderful things for that. People really saw how hard it was. So the more that we can get, who wants to be a lobbyist, please get maternity care passed in the United States. In Europe, it's 6 months to a year, guaranteed, no questions asked. I was working for the U.S. government when I had my son. I got 0 days of paid leave. That's inhumane. I don't recommend it. So there's still a lot to be done. I do think it's getting better, but we should not pretend that it's perfect or that it's fixed or that we don't need to work on it. The other thing that women in the relationship often carry a lot of is the mental to-do list. And I don't think that's something that's any close to being done or fixed because it's invisible work. Perhaps you guys have talked about this. It's so invisible that it's just all in our heads all the time. And so it's hard to divide that up. And it's hard to teach someone those things that didn't grow up thinking about them. But I would love to write a dissertation on this sometime if you have more questions, but I may have just rambled on far too long. All right, advice to my senior self. I would have a lot to say to her. Dr. Conradi knew me then, so she probably could think of some things as well. Gosh, the number one thing I would say is it is impossible to have it figured out right now. So give yourself some grace and some time. And I think this is from a Disney movie, but do the next right thing. It's from Frozen 2. Do the next right thing. So what does your gut tell you is the next right thing for you to do? Follow that. And if at some point it doesn't feel like the right thing or it's not working, do something different, and that's okay. Paths are incredibly varied. I would also say any school that you go to, undergrad, grad school, it's just as much about the people as the work. So make sure you're walking away with some really important, strong friendships. I have moved around the world. This is my 3rd continent since undergrad, and the people that I still text are some of my college friends. And we can go for years at a time without seeing each other, and those relationships are so important. So take the time to surround yourself with the right people who build you up as well as who can help with your career and can help you through all different stages and phases. So that's what I would say. I would say it's impossible to have the answer right now. Do the next right thing, and just surround yourself with the people who are best for you. All right. Did going abroad change sociology for me? And does it look different on different countries? Okay. So I studied abroad in Italy. Please study abroad, especially as sociology majors. Please study abroad. Um, and I took sociology classes while in Florence. And yeah, absolutely it changed. Um, and then I lived in Kenya, and now I live in London. And it changes so much. Um, I'm very interested in women's issues, and it looks different in every country. So, what an Italian woman might consider progressive is not what an American woman would consider progressive. What an American woman would consider an equal partnership in a marriage is not what a British woman or a Kenyan woman would consider. So, I have found that living abroad has really helped me define what's important to me, and that certain values that I have cannot be changed. And it doesn't matter where I am, but there are just certain things that are immovable. And I have also found that there are certain things that I'm more flexible on because I can see different ways of doing things. So, for instance, becoming a mom. I became a mom in Kenya, and all my friends were from different countries. And so instead of being surrounded by all sort of like minded people who did things the same way, I had lots of friends that do things lots of different ways. And so I've learned that what works for them is what works for them. And everyone does things a little bit differently. So I think being abroad, uh, the things that are most important to you will be sharpened and defined, and you will say, no, this is an issue that is not moving, and that kind of feels good to know that about yourself. And then the things that are move a little bit more, that's kind of great because you learn about life from different perspectives, and you say, oh, I hadn't considered doing it that way. And perhaps that's actually the right way for you. And if you never leave your bubble, you don't realize necessarily that there are other ways to do it, right? It's the fish in water who doesn't even know it's in water. So get out of the water, see what's different, take what you like, leave what you don't. But absolutely, I did Project Mexico. It was fantastic. Go on that trip. Take all the opportunities to figure out what your values are in different countries, in different contexts, in different states and parts of the United States. Because it changes a little bit, and that's a good thing. All right, last one. Did my goals change from grad school on? Absolutely, and they should, because you're responding to new things as you learn them, right? You're figuring out what you're doing. So I'm a communications advisor now. I had no degree in communications, but as I worked for more and more NGOs and for more and more government agencies, I saw a need, and it just happened that I was able to fill that need nicely. I don't know if it's part of sociology, but being able to simplify things and explain them to anyone, right? I mean, that's part of why I love sociology, was being able to try to reduce things in a way that was understandable, try to understand what was going on around me. And so I've taken those skills in a very different twist, and I work for a government program that helps turn lights on in Africa, right? So there are countries like Togo where the electrification rates are under 50%. And in this day and age, that's ridiculous. So my colleagues are energy advisors, and they work in Togo, Nigeria, Mozambique, and the DRC. And my job is to explain to the world what they do. And so I am able to, because of my strong people skills and my ability to talk to people break down what people are doing and play it back to them. And if you had told me that I would be doing that in grad school, I would have laughed at you for a number of reasons. Number one, I never didn't want to do communications. Number two, I didn't think I was smart enough to live abroad or do international development. And I think part of living in the present moment, which is something we all learned a lot about during COVID, is following the next interesting thing. I think the way I've done things has made it a little harder to build a career because I've said, oh, that looks interesting. I'm going to pursue that for a while. And then I said, okay, that wasn't quite it. Let me shift this way a little bit. But I also think that's more of the natural progression of careers these days. And I think it can be interesting that way. So I said in an earlier video, but in case you missed it, do the next right thing. Pursue what comes up. You know, if you're looking for something, follow it. I applied to the Tony Blair Institute because they were working on this Power Africa program that I had worked on at the beginning of my career. And I was interested in being a part of that program again. The role they had really didn't fit me. But I applied anyways. And they made a new role for me. That's the first time that's ever happened. It was pretty awesome. But I pursued what looked interesting and it worked out. The other thing I will say is that it has taken me 6 months to a year to get a job both times I've moved countries. And I think that's okay. It takes longer than you think, and it's really frustrating. There's a lot of freelance gig stuff you can do while you're looking, but if it takes you 6 months to find a job, you're not doing it wrong. I applied to over 100 jobs both times. Yeah, so it takes time. No paths are linear these days. No one that I know of goes to GE, works there for the whole career, gets a pension, and goes home. It's much more dynamic, which I think is really exciting because you can pursue what you're interested in that moment. So, you know, whatever you're excited about right now, pursue it full force. And if that's it for you, fantastic. I'm jealous. But if it changes, then just pursue that with your whole heart too, and it'll work out.